Welcome to the Center for Security Policy podcast on national security. We're here today with Senator Ron Johnson, who is the ranking Republican on the Senate Subcommittee on Investigations, who has been the lead independent questioner of the investigations of what happened on January 6th, as well as one of the key members of the Senate, if not the key member of the Senate, raising questions about COVID policy and its effect on our society, as well as our national security. My name is Michael Waller of the Center for Security Policy, so we're going to spend the next hour just talking about these issues. Thanks for joining us.
And welcome to my office.
Thank you. It's the first time I've ever had to be told by the Capitol Police that the public building is closed, that I'm not free to come into the building anymore, so it was kind of a shock to come in here today and be blocked.
You don't look particularly dangerous to me, so.
Well, is there a threat level anymore?
Unfortunately, in today's society, there's always a threat level. So
right.
You have to be conscious of security. It's unfortunate.
Okay. Because it comes across as more like a prop, but we won't get into that just now. But I'm glad to have you here. You've been the number one person in the Senate saying something about this January 6th narrative is wrong. There's more to it than meets the eye. People aren't asking questions. What do you have to say now, 10 months later, of how the investigation is going and who's behind what happened that day?
Well, first of all, I always have to start with I condemned the violence. I found, particularly when we saw it described during the impeachment trial, when we had the videos, the very nicely edited video. I mean, the violence was repugnant. The racial slurs were repulsive. And so, I condemned it on that day. When I came back from the Senate chamber, after we'd been locked in, came back here to my office and started watching it on the TV, and you certainly got a glimpse of it. But at the same time, we also saw the people who entered the Capitol, and they shouldn't have done that. But the ones that entered the Capitol, we were seeing on CNN people staying within the rope lines. So when I kept hearing this term, an armed insurrection, and thousands of armed insurrectionists, kind of where'd they get that from? That is not what a armed insurrection undertaken by thousands of armed insurrectionists would have looked like. So whenever I hear a false narrative, I just kind of naturally push back on it. I had also made news that I didn't intend to make just by stating what I thought is kind of the obvious, that storefronts in major metropolitan areas didn't board up prior to the 2020 election in case Joe Biden won. They boarded up in case there was a Trump victory. And so I made a similar comment that made news, a very similar comment. I said, well, on January 6th, I really never felt threatened, because it was the truth. I never felt threatened. Not going into January 6th, even though I knew there were tens of thousands of protesters exercising their First Amendment right to petition the government, the freedom of speech, trying to convince people like me to vote the way they wanted us to vote. I mean, that's their right. But because I had attended many, many Trump rallies, I knew who Trump supporters were. They're people that are God-fearing by and large. They love this country. They're big supporters of law enforcement. They wouldn't even think of breaking a law. I mean, that is the vast majority of Trump supporters. That's who was coming here protesting. I didn't fear them. And then I just made the extension. Now, had that been, the summer protesters, now I actually use the names which I won't use again because it got me in trouble. But, had that been the rioters that took place in more than 570 riots, a couple thousand law enforcement officers being injured. I mean, I've seen the video of bodies laying in a heap, being beaten by those summer rioters. I said, I might have been a little concerned. That's what pretty innocuous statement, quite honestly. And that blew up into, Ron Johnson's a racist. And, so again, I've been pushing back on the false narratives. And it's important to do that because I think, just for historical purposes, the American public really needs to know what happened on January 6th. Again, the violence, repugnant. The racial slurs, repulsive. I condemn them. I want to see those people that engage in those acts prosecuted to the full extent of the law, but I want the justice to be administered equally as well. between the summer rioters and the people engaged in those acts of violence. And I don't want people that showed up just peacefully engaging in their First Amendment rights to be harassed or prosecuted or put on terrorist watch lists and that type of thing as well. So that's why it's important to have the truth be told on this.
Yeah, and even the, well, you asked a question of the FBI Assistant Director for Counterterrorism, what she thought, and she even said this was set up by a small group of organizers with a large number of people just trespassing, out-of-towners who didn't really know what they were getting mixed up with, or words to that effect.
I asked her, again, thousands of armed insurrectionists. I asked her, well, how many firearms were confiscated either on the Capitol grounds or in the Capitol? I didn't know what the answer was going to be. For all I know, it was going to be 300. She said 0. Kind of a mic drop moment. It sort of laid waste to the narrative of thousands of armed insurrectionists. Now, again, we do know the summer protesters did show America how you can use a flagpole or frozen water bottles and turn those into a weapon. But again, when most people think of armed, they think of firearmed. But an important point to make that's not made very often is, why was that narrative of thousands of armed insurrectionists, why was that adopted so easily on a bipartisan basis? I think I have the answer on that, is those responsible for providing a security plan when you're going to have tens of thousands of protesters, the fact that they didn't have an adequate plan. I mean, in your eyewitness account, you said you didn't see any police officers on the west side of the Capitol. Knowing that tens of thousands of people are going to be coming up there protesting, there were no police officers present. So those that were responsible, Capitol Hill police leadership, the sergeant at arms, the congressional leadership, those are responsible for securing the Capitol in that situation. I mean, they get let off the hook if the narrative takes hold that there were thousands of armed insurrectionists. I mean, what could they possibly have done to secure the Capitol, prevent this breach in the face of thousands of armed insurrectionists? So I think that's one of the reasons this has taken hold. And of course, the media, the social media, they are the communication department of the Democrat Party, and it works for them as well, I mean, politically. Yeah. So again, it just, on a bipartisan basis, just works for a lot of people. So that's why that narrative, that false narrative, took hold. It's one of the reasons I was trying to push back on it, because it's completely false. I think the American people deserve the truth.
Yeah. Now, just for transparency for our viewers, I was at the protest on the west front of the Capitol, and I wrote my eyewitness account for the Center for Security Policy about a week later, and then the Federalist published it, and then you found it, and you raised it at the hearings. And
I entered it in the record.
It entered it into the record, and it was accepted by unanimous consent as eyewitness evidence, right? Until certain of your colleagues.
Well, until they heard what was actually in it, the truth that pushed back down the narrative they wanted to promote. And so, yeah, the chairwoman of the select committee, or the special committee, the combined committee, went out before the cameras right after the hearing and said, "Oh, here goes Senator Johnson again, entering a conspiracy theory into our record." No, I entered.
But she didn't enter it. She didn't object, right? It was unanimous consent.
Well, I mean, that's kind of beside the point. The point being is, I entered a truthful eyewitness account, and why were they so resistant to it? Why are people so resistant to hearing the truth? Why have we come to a point in this country where censorship is not only accepted, it's being promoted? Why are people afraid of the truth? All I'm ever trying to do is just, here's the truth. Certainly the truth is as I see it. If you want to challenge what I'm saying, go ahead and challenge it. We should have freedom of speech, but we don't in this country anymore. Whether it's on January 6th, whether it's on the vaccine injuries, COVID in general. This is a very dangerous point we've reached in our country, where we don't, too many of us don't even value freedom of speech. They're pushing back on it. They want to limit it.
Yeah, and then you get also there can be many truths depending on where one's standing at a certain point. So what I saw was different from what other people saw, but it all blends together. And then what you saw was, so they're all different truths, but it's like the lead investigators on this don't want those facts that disrupt their narrative. They're not interested in them.
They're not. And certainly from what I've tried to do since January 6th, when we started investigating this right away, but I'm not a committee chairman, so I don't have all those powers. But all I've been trying to do is put together a complete an accurate record of what happened, so we know. So I sent my investigators into Capitol Police, where they were able to view videos until they're kind of like not able to anymore. But we're just trying to uncover. Okay, I would describe it as, let's kind of put together like a Civil War battle description. Where were the points of conflict? How many people were engaged in those points of conflict? How long did it last? Again, just to let people know. As a result, my investigators noticed that there was a West Terrace door that was opened. They allowed, Capitol Police allowed somebody to exit through those doors. We still don't know who exited. But once the door was open, over 300 people streamed in. No violence associated with it. They just came to the Capitol. My guess is those are certainly some of the people that were walking and staying within the rope lines. Again, you wouldn't think armed insurrectionists would respect the velvet rope lines, but they were.
Right.
You wouldn't expect armed insurrectionists would be encouraging people to remain peaceful. They'll work with us as long as we have to remain peaceful, remain calm. And there's all kinds of video that's showing that. It just doesn't get shown on the mainstream media. You've got to look to alternate sites. You've got to go to Tucker Carlson and see what actually happened in the summer riots, the repugnant and repulsive violence and assaults on individuals that were leaving bodies in crumpled breakage. You have to go to like Tucker Carlson to see that, and then there's threats to trying to take him off of Fox News.
Yeah.
People are afraid of the truth.
Did you see Tucker's Patriot Purge documentary?
I did, yeah. And I thought what was interesting about that is it did confirm parts of your eyewitness account, where you were saying that the crowd was there kind of milling about, and it wasn't really until they started firing tear gas that, first of all, the crowd was very puzzled by it. According to your testimony, it's like, what are you doing? We're your friends. I mean, we're not a threat. And that seemed to kind of rile up the crowd, and that was, you kind of see where there was maybe an initial surge of people, maybe those agent provocateurs you were talking about, and there's a separation. Everybody else was back there and saying, no, don't go in the I mean, a lot of people saying, don't go in the Capitol, but then there were some people up on towers going forward, in your eyewitness account, do not retreat. Mm-hmm. Just kind of odd. What was all that about? Yeah. People that knew how to control a crowd.
Because we were afraid of a stampede of people as the tear gas was coming in. There was no way out of that confined area. And one of the provocateurs, he was standing on a stone wall section, and he grabbed me by the shoulder. He's swearing at me, saying, "Do not leave, do not retreat." I'm like, why do you care? Yeah. And then, somebody's organizing this violence. This is scripted. And then the more video you look at, the more you can, even the Washington Post had that great crowdsourced video project where they were trying to prove their narrative. If you look at it, you can actually identify the organized units who came with identical tactical gear and different color tape on their helmets and on their packs and so forth. So the more you look at this video, the more you can identify units and preparation and organization and provocateurs to completely deflate the narrative that's been coined.
But it's been so difficult to put the truth together because, first of all, how your eyewitness account was treated, immediately termed a conspiracy theory, but also the way the FBI has doggedly pursued anybody that was basically in Washington D.C. Early morning raids with SWAT teams, that type of thing. So people are not willing to come forward with their videos. They don't want to be identified. So as much as I've tried to solicit that, people, they were here in the Capitol, they just kind of want that forgotten. They don't want to be noticed. So it is going to be difficult. Now maybe over time, maybe once the people who have been arrested or charged, once they're prosecuted, and it's going to be interesting to follow those trials, by the way. There have been a few plea agreements. It's interesting to see some of the plea agreements going, downgraded from a felony to a petty misdemeanor of unlawful parading, I think was one of them. Again, I'm not defending people that enter the Capitol. As a matter of fact, I was on a radio show that day during the midst of the breach, and one of the radio talk show hosts from Wisconsin, by the way, whose Capitol was breached and occupied for days. I can't remember exactly. It might even been weeks, and that was okay because they were the right kind of protesters. Yeah, they were from the left. Okay, so that was okay. I mean, they could vandalize the Capitol. That's okay. This just happened to be the wrong people occupying the people's house. But this rodeo talk show host, because of what happened in Madison, was saying, "Well, I hope they get in there. I hope they do a sit-in, and that's the people's house." And I said, "No, that's right to part company with you. No, that people should not be entering the Capitol." So again, I was on record, but I don't get credit for like the actual things I say. People just conjure up and put the worst possible spin. They'll take things out of context. That's kind of where we're at in media today.
Well, so let's look at what you've been saying since the beginning, that this seems to be organized. It wasn't a presidentially incited riot where the president...
That's what you said from your eyewitness testimony. All I've done is I've just allowed your testimony to stand on its own. Again, to this day, I don't know exactly what happened. I'm just searching for the truth. I'm just trying to encourage people, if you've got video, if you've got a story to tell, come tell it so we can assemble, in the end, a historical record of what actually happened versus the false narrative that's out there right now.
Well, those narratives have been, the president incited it, it was a spontaneous riot. Well, that narrative's been knocked down. Even the Justice Department says that somebody organized some of this in advance. Even people on the left say that. And then insurrection narrative. Well, there are federal statutes about insurrection being a crime. Yet, of all the people charged, who has been charged with insurrection?
I guess unlawful parading is close.
So even the Biden DOJ under Merrick Garland has not seen any evidence to charge somebody with insurrection. And then terrorism. Well, we have lots of terrorism-related statutes. Why hasn't anybody been charged with that? So all of the narratives, as the evidence is showing, are being knocked down one by one.
But they're not. But they're still being put forward.
Yeah.
Now, I have noticed they haven't used armed insurrection recently. It's just insurrection, insurrectionists. So they're still promoting this. And the same thing with the Russian collusion hoax. After the Mueller report, once the Michael Horowitz issued his FISA report, it's pretty obvious that the FBI investigation was thoroughly corrupt, that they knew that the Steele dossier contained Russian disinformation, and yet you don't get retractions from the mainstream media. Now finally, the Washington Post very quietly retract one story. But my guess is a large percentage of the American public still believe that the Trump campaign colluded with Russia, and that's been a proven fact. Right. And that, but it's just not. I mean, there's a great article by Gerard Baker in the Wall Street Journal this week, where he just lays out all of these major false stories promoted by the mainstream media, that even if you don't really pay attention to the news, it's been repeated, these false stories have been repeated so often. And of course, the granddaddy of all those is the Russian collusion hoax, that the American public have just accepted it by the drive-by media. And as I think it was Ray Donovan once said, well, what window do you go to get your reputation back? What window do we go to get the truth back? So the media has pushed all these false narratives. And when I say pushed, I mean pushed, so that even citizens that don't really follow the news are aware of these falsehoods. They believe it's the truth, and that's still driving our politics. So I've said this repeatedly, no matter what involvement China or Russia might have had in interfering with the election, what the media and the social media have done in terms of interfering in our elections have had a far greater impact. They got a candidate who wouldn't even leave his basement elected, calling him this moderate, So no, I mean, this is we are in such a bizarre world here in America today, and it should frighten every American.
Yeah, and then the same people pushing these false narratives that you mentioned don't want to blame China and the Chinese Communist Party for the virus that's been plaguing all of us, killing us, wrecking our livelihoods. The one entity in the world that these people on the left don't want to hold accountable, not just lefties either, is the Chinese Communist Party. Why is that?
Oh, it's puzzling, but the Chinese Communist Party is very strategic in the investments they make, whether it's geopolitically in their Belt and Road Initiative, or when it's the funds they provide to universities, the funds they provide to medical journals, the funds they provide all over the place. They're very, very strategic in how they do it. And of course, they also have 1.4 billion people as a potential market for all these big corporations or organizations. And so that's why you see the NBA not willing to buck the CCP. Incredibly influential, and they are they are very strong at pushing back and enforcing their viewpoint. I mean, they're very persistent that way. They don't allow dissent. It's not part of their culture. It's certainly not part of their political environment. They do not allow consent, or dissent. And so we have to take that into account.
Yeah, so it's like our own society, though, is not allowing that dissent either, because, for example, in the military, you would always do a red team approach, or not always, but you try to think of what would the enemy be doing? Let's get into their heads and think of what the enemy's doing so we can understand them and fight them. Has there been any red team approach on the January 6th investigation?
That would only be me. And you know, people are actually looking into it that want the truth, but no, I mean, there's a groupthink here. I think personally it's a big cover-up for those that really should have been responsible for Capitol security, not having an adequate security plan. My personal opinion, the Capitol breach never should have occurred. I mean, they had what they call the bicycle fencing, the bicycle racks. Right. You know, you man that with adequate manpower, and you're not going to have a breach. If there would have been an altercation somewhere, you could have stamped it down. You can have layers of defense. Again, you got tens of thousands of people coming here. You know, tens of thousands of people a little upset that you had a corrupt FBI investigation. There were all kinds of irregularities in the election that are just being blown out by the courts. They won't even look at evidence. Again, I've listed all these reasons why I understand why Trump supporters were pretty frustrated. The press hates them. The press has promoted all these false stories. They never retract them. Trump supporters know their false narratives, and they just cost their guy in the election. So so you ought to be prepared for the fact that you've got 10,000 people a little upset, and be prepared. But you can also, and this was I was counting on, is these are people that respect law enforcement. All you have to is a little show of force, and an adequate security plan would have, recognized the provocateurs that we've now seen on camera that you were pointing out in your eyewitness testimony, and they could have handled
identified by name.
Yeah.
And that's a weird thing. The one from Arizona who was featured on Tucker's documentary, he's videoed the night before trying to provoke people to attack the Capitol, and they're all denouncing him as fed. And then a video of him the next day leading the push against the first small outer perimeter of those bicycle fences at the Capitol Police right there too. And there's been no FBI interest in him.
No, the FBI is doing early morning raids to people that just were in D.C. and traced them by their cell phones. They're not questioning this guy? We don't know anything about him?
Yeah.
No, it's bizarre. It's why I led an effort, had at least four of my colleagues write to Merrick Garland, Attorney General, say, okay, well, just describe to us how you've handled the summer rioters, versus how you've handled and the nth degree you've gone to investigating January 6th. I mean, I'd like to see some equal application of justice. Again, I'm condemning the violence on both sides, but if you really want to take a look at where more violence occurred, where more law enforcement was injured, where more property damage occurred, that was in the 570 plus summer riots that now we're just supposed to sweep under the rug and instead proclaim that what happened on January 6th, as repulsive as it was the greatest threat to democracy in history. I mean, I'm sorry, I'm just not buying it. It's just not an accurate portrayal. But I understand it serves the purpose of the Democrats, it serves the purpose of the media, the social media, and that's why we have it.
Well, if it's the greatest threat since the Civil War, or whatever, War of 1812, whatever they're calling it, then why aren't they looking at everything and not trying to silence other evidence? I mean, it's real evidence that they don't want to see.
Well, you see Kenosha, okay? Yeah. You see how that downtown burned. The report over 100 businesses. Significant destruction. And I think more than 2 or 3 dozen burned to the ground. Now, had we had even a fraction of that in the Capitol, we wouldn't have been back in voting or debating later that night. So I mean, that just proves it. I mean, this delayed our proceedings by, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 hours. That's not what the result of an armed insurrection would have been.
Right, that's disruption of an illegal proceeding, which is a crime, but it's not
which I condemn and prosecute and stuff. But let's not blow this out of proportion. Let's also keep it in perspective of what we ought to be concerned about. That right now there's a trial going on in Kenosha, and there are people massing outside the courthouse. And again, we're not concerned about riots if it's the plea that I guess the crowd wants. We're only concerned about riots in case this young man is acquitted. And I generally don't comment on judicial proceedings, but I've seen a fair amount of the highlights of that trial, and I can certainly understand where a jury might come back and say, that is self-defense. We certainly shouldn't be even contemplating rioting in case that is the verdict of this jury, or the judge grants a dismissal because of prosecutorial misconduct.
And threatening of jurors.
Yeah, the intimidation.
There's a report that came out today that some jurors might feel threatened to acquit.
Wouldn't you?
If I was just an ordinary person and didn't know, absolutely,
Yeah,
I'd be scared to death.
I don't see how this really can be a fair trial at this point.
Yeah. So it's kind of a pattern that we're seeing nationwide. It's like our country has been swept with this psychosis of some sort, that evidence doesn't matter, rules and laws don't matter, procedure doesn't matter, due process doesn't matter, clean voting doesn't matter. It's sort of like the Constitution doesn't matter.
Well, again, those things only matter if you're conservative, and they can use the law against a conservative. If you're a liberal, if you're a Democrat, I will look the other way, because your misbehavior, your occupying the state capitol in Madison, your vandalism there, that's okay, that's accepted. Or 570 riots in the summer. It's for a good cause. Let's look the other way. Let's enter into these prosecutorial agreements where we just let people out. Let's encourage, for example, bail without bail. Just release of these rioters without bail at all. Let's encourage that. Let's encourage, as political figures, let's encourage people to donate to the bail funds to get these rioters bailed out of jail. Yeah. As opposed to January 6th, lock them up and throw away the key. Put them in a jail that is kind of so abusive that all the other prisoners have been transferred to another jail, but the 44 January 6th prisoners are still in that same jail that's been emptied out of other prisoners.
Yeah, this is the kind of thing where you've Judge Royce Lamberth, Reagan appointee, really tough law and order judge, who's handling a lot of these cases, ordered the U.S. Marshals to investigate the D.C. jail conditions, and saw conditions there that on human rights grounds in a banana republic would be unacceptable. I mean, we cut off aid to third world countries that had jails like that were treating people that way, denying them water for days, denying them toilet services for days, denying them edible food, and all of these other things as a punitive measure, as well as just the crappy condition of such a jail anyway. This is how countries get sanctioned.
So again, he cleared all the other prisoners out of that jail, except for 44 January 6th prisoners. Go figure.
He freed about 400, or he moved them to another facility, but
not 44.
Wow.
I mean, that's the information we have.
Wow. Now, back on your investigation of January 6th, what roadblocks have you run into?
Well, somebody, not us, somebody released some of the video that Capitol Police allowed my staff to view, so we were blocked for a certain point in time. We got kind of what we wanted. I'm not sure what our access is that video anymore. I don't think we had access to all the video we wanted. But I think our biggest roadblock is, again, the intimidation by the FBI going after anybody who was here, whether they entered the Capitol or whether they were peacefully protesting. It scared everybody, so they're all intimidated. They don't want to come forward with their videos off of their phones and stuff. So we're just, it's difficult for us to gather information because people just want to be left alone. And I completely understand that, but that's a product of the intimidation of how the Justice Department is handling January 6th as opposed to how they've handled the summer riots.
Yeah. After you highlighted my piece in the Federalist, I got tons of offers of information from a lot of other people who were there saying that their accounts were very similar, if not identical to mine. Some of them offering camera footage, some of them saying they would love to talk to the authorities, but they're afraid. Yeah. They said, how can I provide information? And I said, well, first you have to lawyer up. You just can't do a citizen's duty anymore. They'll nail you, or you're at risk of being nailed just by coming forward, so you have to get a lawyer. And they said, well, I can't afford a lawyer, I'm not going to do that. So we're in a situation now where the average citizen is afraid of the FBI. I grew up with Ephraim Zimbalist Jr., and I'm sure you did, and the FBI.
You run the FBI for protection.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But you made a really important point here that I've found out, I've learned as Chairman of Homeland Security, the Senate Oversight Committee. The reason you need a free press is because it is the press that probably gets the best information first, because the witnesses feel at ease that their cover is not going to be blown, that they can remain anonymous going to whistleblower talk to the press. And so that's why press can uncover these stories. They don't trust that if you come to Congress that their identity is going to remain confidential. You go to the FBI and, at this point in time, it just kind of goes in the black hole. So people have confidence in telling the story to the press, and that's why it's so important we have a free but largely unbiased press. And that's a real tragedy of today's society, is the mainstream media is so far to the left. As I keep saying, the communication department of the Democrat Party, of radical leftists. You don't have that middle trusted media that we kind of all collectively go to and go, okay, well, I mean, they're going to vet things. They're not going to print a story where they don't have backup, where they haven't confirmed it 2 or 3 times. We don't have journalists anymore. We have advocates, by and large. They don't, when they interview me, it's not an interview, it's an argument. I go on to Chuck Todd, and it's like, I can't, as a conservative, I can't even get a full sentence out often. I mean, you compare how a Chuck Todd interviews me versus how he interviews, for example, Amy Klobuchar. Gives her a softball question, sits back and lets her talk for 2-3 minutes, uninterrupted. Me, he starts out with an incredibly biased piece, asks me an obnoxious question, won't listen to my answer, interrupts me. It's really hard, quite honestly, answering a question where you're being interrupted all the time. It's hard to maintain a line of reasoning. You
can't get the context out.
It's very difficult. Yeah. So again, I experienced it firsthand, so maybe I'm pretty sensitive to it. But just ask the viewers, pay attention to the difference between on a Sunday show how the Sunday show hosts interview a Democrat senator versus a Republican senator. It's almost night and day.
Yeah. Yeah, but being asked tough questions is not a problem.
No,
I'm being allowed to answer the question.
Yeah, would you let me answer it? Okay,
yeah. So, and when you had CNN and the Washington Post and these others come out and call it all a baseless conspiracy theory, and then I called and contacted many of those writers to say, hey, you've got to have a clarification or retraction. I did not say, what the senator, he quoted me accurately. I did not say I saw a certain group there. I said I surmised it was a certain group, and I didn't see that left-wing group do anything wrong. Probably the first time in my life I've ever said I didn't see a left-wing group do something wrong. And they warped it into this twisted conspiracy theory. The only ones who made a correction was the Daily Mail, which is a British publication. And then the Washington Post, they had a blogger, and then the reporters just quoted from the blogger as though he was a serious reporter.
Well, you mentioned the British press. It's sad. You have to go to the British press to, for example, really cover the Hunter Biden laptop. I know the New York Post's done some good job, but it's most of the news stories coming out of Daily Mail. Same thing in terms of COVID information. We've got to go to Public Health England. We've got to go to the UK or to Israel to determine what's happening with the vaccines, because our own CDC is not collecting the information we would need to really determine whether President Biden is actually accurate when he says this is a pandemic of the unvaxxed, or to maybe PolitiFact check him when he says that if you take this vax, you're not going to be hospitalized, you're not going to get sick, you're not going to die, you're not going to go in ICU, you're not even going to get infected. That's what he said in July. So, well, sorry, we've got a lot of deaths of people that are fully vaccinated. When are you going to retract that? But it's just sad. I mean, we're literally having to go to other countries for their news, for the information out of their health agencies, because we're not getting the truth from our news media, we're not getting the truth from our federal health agencies.
So a United States senator cannot get truthful information about the pandemic from federal sources.
No,
so you have to go to the Israelis and the Brits and foreign countries to get accurate or something that's more trustworthy.
I mean, you're going back to the corrupt FBI investigation. I had subpoenaed the FBI director, Christopher Wray. I really didn't get squat out of him. It was just slow walked, and I've had people tell me that they've admitted that they were slow walking the information. I've written dozens of oversight letters on COVID. I wrote, I think, over 15 oversight letters to Capitol Hill Police and Sergeant at Arms on January 6th. You get non-response responses when you get anything. Generally, you get nothing.
Now, why would the FBI director slow walk a request from an oversight senator who has direct responsibility?
Because he doesn't want the truth out. He wants to protect his agency. I mean,
he's wrecking his agency.
So
people don't trust it anymore.
So we had, I know we're bopping around here, but so we had the Pfizer report from Michael Horowitz, and in there, Bill Priestap, one of the assistant directors of the FBI, says the FBI had no knowledge that there could be Russian disinformation in the Steele dossier. In the same Pfizer report, and my staff uncovered these redacted footnotes that completely contradict that show that the FBI knew as early as October 2016 that there was Russian disinformation contained in the Steele dossier. They knew for sure by January 2017. So in that, now, somebody made the decision to classify and redact those footnotes. I asked Michael Horowitz, who did that? Well, somebody higher up in the Justice Department FBI. There was nothing classified about that. It was just embarrassing to the agency. But fast forward to March 2018. Christopher Wray's been director for probably about a year. Now, again, they knew, Igor Danchenko or somebody like him was putting this information in the Steele dossier. They knew this in October of 2016. March of 2018, under Director Wray's leadership, the FBI comes in and briefs the Senate Intel Committee, who's investigating all this, and says, no, we've got confidence in the Steele dossier.
And Danchenko is a Russian citizen.
Yeah, I mean, this is...
And he was under suspicion for being a Russian intelligence asset.
But the FBI knew the Steele dossier wasn't worth the paper it was written on. They knew it in October 2016, and yet Comey pretty well set up the Mueller investigation. I mean, did nobody say anything? I mean, yeah, I asked Christopher Wray, say, by the way, do you know Michael Sussman, Director Wray? Kind of like, what is the meaning of no? This is a very close community here. Mm-hmm. People had to know that Michael Sussman was working for the Hillary Clinton campaign. He comes and talks to somebody in the FBI. Hey, I'm just doing this as a citizen. You got to know about this Alpha Bank thing. I'm just doing this as a citizen. No, he's doing it as a member of the Clinton campaign, feeding false information. I mean, if you haven't read, your views, if you haven't read the John Durham indictment of Michael Sussman, read it. It's very revealing. But it's also revealing, so it just lays out exactly how corrupt the Hillary Clinton campaign was, how they foisted this false narrative on the American public. I mean, the most destructive political dirty trick in U.S. history. But what's even more outrageous is, where's the press covering it? Again, turn the tables on this. Had this been the Trump campaign doing this to the Hillary Clinton campaign, and we're starting to find out about this now, you couldn't turn on a TV program. You couldn't look at a newspaper on a newsstand without that major headlines for weeks and months. Instead, we get all these other false stories that Gerard Baker writes about, they never correct. Just, they get him in there, they pound the story away so it just comes inbred in the American knowledge, population's knowledge, and then they just drive by and walk away and never correct it.
And they're still, well, I was at a trial with Judge Lamberth, who we talked about before, and somebody wanted to introduce the New York Times as a newspaper of record as evidence, and he said, that's garbage. So I'm not going to believe them. I'm not going to admit it as evidence. No. But back on this, though, back on the FBI, by statute, the FBI's, one of its delineated jobs is to monitor and combat foreign propaganda and disinformation. But in this case, you're saying that the Bureau was whitewashing that foreign disinformation? Promoting it?
I mean, again, this was directed from the very top of the FBI. You don't think again, we have proof that they knew that there were Russians affiliated with the Russian intelligence services. They were feeding into the Steele dossier. They knew it in October 2016 and told no one.
If it was a rogue agent or analyst, that person would have been sacked and indicted by now.
Yeah, and then you've got the struck page texts talking about how their sister agencies are leaking like mad, scorn worried political. Man, that was written in December of 2016 as well. So again, there's a reason I've come to calling these agencies the deep state. They're very deep. Who could President Trump trust? I mean, 2 weeks into his administration, somebody in his administration is leaking phone calls he had with two world leaders.
Right.
Then you had Colonel Vindman, do the same thing with the Zlinko phone call.
Right.
That was all set up with Adam Schiff and his personnel. I mean, these things are all connected.
Yeah, and they're all heroes, and it's all a crime to criticize them.
They're all heroes, and I'm the conspiracy theorist.
Yeah,
it's like
everything is a baseless conspiracy theory.
Right.
If you or I say it, even if there's complete video evidence or anything else to substantiate.
So the press uses that as a pejorative, right? So conspiracy theory or conspiracy theorist, and then misinformation, disinformation. Well, tell me exactly what I've said that's not true. Whether we're talking COVID, whether we're talking these investigations, rather than just say it's disinformation, tell me what's not true. Literally, we had Democrats create an intelligence product, get it classified, leak to the media, claiming that Senator Grassley and myself, the President Pro Tem of the Senate, okay, Chairman of the Judiciary Finance Committee, that we were soliciting and then disseminating Russian disinformation from this Andrei Derkach. I'd never heard of the guy. But they leak to the media. We're having to respond to all these. What are you talking about? And then what ended up happening is my ranking member, Senator Peters, entered that Russian disinformation into our investigatory record. And then he's got the balls to accuse me of pushing Russian disinformation when they're the ones that pushed it, they're the ones that made it up, and they're the ones that entered it into the record.
As if it was evidence.
Go figure. Now, trust me, that's never been corrected in the press.
Wow.
This is again. I'm living this. I'm seeing how it works
all the time.
It's dirty. It's corrupt.
Is that why you haven't decided to run again?
No.
Won't get into that further, but and it's back when I remember when Pat Leahy was kicked off the Senate Intelligence Committee for leaking to the Washington Post. And you had Senator David Boren, who was the committee chairman, Democrat from Oklahoma, set it up to give every senator a memorandum, except for Senator Leahy, whose classified version had certain inconsistencies in it that were leaked to the Post. They ended up in the Post, and that's how. But a fellow Democrat had Leahy booted off the committee. Now he's, the most senior guy in the Senate. But the point being, you used to have this kind of discipline among the Democrats or the Republicans for that matter, to be self-policing against leaking secrets. Now there's a move so that every single House and Senate office is going to have staffers with top secret SCI clearance. Have you heard that?
Well, it's hard to get. You do need staff to kind of help you on this. But by the way, another example of the corruption is I got briefed. I think it was August of 2020. think it was, yeah, or no, August 2019, I think it was. And now it's probably 2020. And it was all about, supposedly that, I was a target of Russia, okay? It's like, you're not telling me, okay, give me the intelligence behind this briefing. Can't show you that. Who set up this briefing? You're not telling me anything that I'm not aware of. Why are you briefing me this? I knew why they were briefing, because they'd done it before. They'd set me up before to leak it to the media. They did this with my Andrei Teleshenko subpoena. It's the exact same thing. They set up a briefing, and then they leak it to the media and say, well, Johnson was warned about this stuff. So months later, lo and behold, the Washington Post has that leak.
And which they are we talking about here?
Well, the FBI.
So you have the FBI, part of the executive branch, supposed to be independent, setting up elected lawmakers to leak against them for political purposes.
Yeah. I mean, they briefed me that I was...
This is a felony. This is felonious conduct by our FBI.
But they're the ones in charge of the law. But anyway, so that is, you would like to think, and it's really crucial for democracy, that our law enforcement is above reproach, that they have credibility and integrity, and you can trust them. And what I found, certainly in my investigations, is we can't. I still don't think we can. It's a travesty. Our intelligence community, the same way. How about federal health agencies? I know we're going to kind of talk about these mandates and stuff. Where's the transparency? We don't have the information we really need on COVID. One thing I'd like to state about this too is, I wish everybody would admit there is so much we do not know about the coronavirus, about COVID as a disease, about COVID-19 vaccines. There's just so much we don't know. So as a result, you would think when you lack a lot of knowledge that you'd exercise some caution, for example, in pushing a vaccine on everybody, including children who we do know, I mean, the science tells us, are at greater risk of the seasonal flu, and we don't force a vaccine in their arm for the flu than they are for COVID. And yet here we've got this just unbelievable push and pressure to vaccinate little children. And a complete denial, by the way, of the vaccine injuries.
Yeah, and you treat the parents like they're criminals.
Yeah. So again, the people pushing the mandates, this administration, the health agencies, the media, social media, they're denying three basic realities. The first one is they're denying natural immunity. And more science, because we're always told science, more and more science is showing it makes perfect sense that natural immunity would be strong and long-lasting. It often is. The natural immunity recognizes the entire virus versus the vaccine, only the spike protein, and there are variants that are evading, Delta variant evading the vaccine right now. The second reality they're denying is that even if you get the vaccine, you can get seriously ill, you can die. You can transmit the disease, which completely blows the reason for having a mandate to begin with. And the other denial, and this is almost the biggest tragedy, is denying vaccine injuries. I'm in contact with people. I mean, it's obvious that it's the vaccine that caused their paralysis or the death of their loved one. There's no other explanation for it. Mm-hmm. We have 18,000 deaths reported in the VAERS system. On average, over the last 26 years, for the seasonal flu vaccine, it's 78 deaths. 78 deaths for the seasonal flu per year. We're up to 18,000 10 months into this thing. And the CDC is still saying, well, nothing to see here. Well, there's no evidence. By the way, 5,600 of those worldwide deaths occur on days 0, 1, or 2.
Wow.
And we're just supposed to deny all these. I published this, and sorry, C-SPAN, you probably get censored now. You may get pulled off YouTube. I get suspended. And again, by the way, I get lied about. For example, when I got suspended by YouTube, the article written in The Hill said that Senator Johnson said the vaccine was not safe. I never said that. I did say it's not as safe as we all hoped and prayed it would be. And even the CDC admits that 6 women died of blood clots from the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. Okay, so I think it's a true statement. Sure. We would have liked to have seen it was 100% safe, right? So it's not as safe as we all hoped it would be. And then I just quote these figures from the CDC's own safety surveillance websites. And that gets, again, the pejorative of, I'm spreading misinformation. Well, what's misinformation? I'm just telling the truth. I'm conveying the truth that's not fitting in with their narrative. that these things are 100% safe, 100% effective. They're not. I wish they were, but they're not. And as a result, the mandates are pointless. And when you take a look at the freedom that we have lost during this pandemic, it is profound, and we're just not awakened to that. We're just not realizing. Too many of our fellow citizens have accepted, and those of us that are pushing back, and more are. I mean, we're vilified, we're censored,
Deplatformed.
we're suppressed. You know, we're mocked, we're ridiculed. It's like we're just trying to fight for individual freedom and individual health autonomy.
So coming in here to do the interview, I asked the Capitol Police officer who wasn't wearing a mask, do I have to wear a mask coming in here? And she kind of rolled her eyes and laughed and said, kind of, sort of, not really. And so there's no mask mandate within the Capitol complex. So is Congress, are members of Congress and their staffs exempt from these vaccine mandates, or are they also mandated to get the vaccine?
No, I'm sure we're exempt. That's a dirty little secret around here. Congress exempts himself from all kinds of laws. I don't think it's right, but again, I don't think anybody should be subject to the vaccine mandate, so I'm glad we are exempt. I wouldn't, I just would stop coming here if I'm not going to get the vaccine. I had COVID. I was very lucky I had asymptomatic COVID. There's a question that's never asked. How do you explain 40 to 50% of people that were asymptomatic? I mean, was there already some level of natural immunity from some other similar type of coronavirus? Which would kind of indicate that natural immunity is probably pretty effective if you had a coronavirus that you don't even really know about that prevented you from getting overly sick. Another really big question we should be asking is, did our response to COVID work? I mean, I realize Anthony Fauci is the COVID god. 760,000 deaths, $6 trillion in spending that we don't have, the human toll, the economic devastation, the isolation, the increased suicides, the increased overdoses. We're at, I think, 225 deaths per 100,000. Sweden's at 145. We rank, I think, 23 out of 200 countries, and you don't want a high rank here in terms of deaths as a percentage of your population. It's been a miserable failure, and yet you have a good percentage of our population still views Anthony Fauci as the authoritative figure. He claims he is science. Yeah. It's been a miserable failure. It's like, America, wake up. I mean, this has been a miserable failure. Quit listening to these people. They're not telling you the truth. They're not giving you the full story. They're not being transparent.
So for the average citizen, I mean, we've gone through law enforcement, sort of counterintelligence as a FBI offshoot, Homeland Security, health. Who can the citizens trust anymore to? Where can you go as citizens
themselves? Now? Take control of your own life. Don't look to the federal government to solve your problems, because they're not capable of doing so. I mean, the proper approach to handling this pandemic would have been pouring all kinds of time and effort and resources into early treatment. Instead, what the Faucis of the world did, they sabotaged early treatment. Wouldn't even consider things like ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, even though, to give you the same FAERS data, the FDA Adverse Events Reporting System, on average over 26 years, ivermectin, 15 deaths. Hydroxychloroquine, 64 deaths. Again, that's compared to 18,000 deaths for the COVID vaccine that they're pushing. Or remdesivir, $3,000 a treatment, 1,499 deaths. And they're denigrating ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine. And I'm just saying, why not let people have the right to try? Why not give it a shot?
They're abusing people.
Do something.
They're abusing physicians who are trying to find an independent solution.
Oh, threaten them with their license. Yeah, so that's why physicians won't touch it, because they'll have their license pulled. Yeah. Something they worked for decades to get. They could lose their livelihood.
So you find this the same thing in our federal law enforcement, in Homeland Security bureaucracy, and intelligence services, where people on the inside who are contrarians, or they have a different point of view, or they're saying the intelligence does not support the conclusions that are being made in public, they're getting the same type of harassment, persecution, threats of loss of livelihood, having their security clearances pulled, which is the worst punishment of all.
Getting purged.
Across the board.
Yeah, just getting sidelined, awful assignments to just get them to quit. No, I mean, it's a serious problem. I I've never been a fan of the federal government. I'm far less of a fan today. And my advice to the citizens is concentrate on local government that has, concentrate on your education system. Make sure that your kids aren't indoctrinated the way they're being indoctrinated today. Stop looking at the federal government to solve your problems. All the federal government's doing is mortgaging your children's future.
Yeah. So when they're trying to censor you, like the average citizen should find out what they're trying to censor so that maybe that's getting closer to the unauthorized truth, as the Soviets would say.
Well, just take everything you hear with a grain of salt from both sides. Listen, there is misinformation on the full spectrum.
No shortage.
Okay, there really is. So, and that's what's so unfortunate about not having a mainstream media in the middle that is upholding journalistic standards of checking and double checking and triple checking before they run with a story and push and promote a story that is so unbelievably disruptive to our political process. And that's what the whole Russian hoax was. I mean, take a look at what happened. I've said, and I believe this, because the press pushed this false narrative and other false narratives, it culminated in January 6th. That's why Trump supporters were so ticked off, why they came here to protest. Again, they just get pushed in their face. You didn't see that. I mean, even though observers couldn't observe, even though, according to the Bader-Carter Commission, the greatest threat for fraud is absentee ballots. We doubled absentee ballots while we relaxed all the controls. Yeah. But we're not supposed to talk about that. It's nothing to see here.
No. And if you look at the State Department's own guidelines for monitoring international elections, they say that that's the biggest source of fraud, and that the U.S. should be very suspicious of developing countries that use absentee ballots, mail-in ballots, non-voter ID type thing, where we have other people dip their finger in and show their national ID to vote. Those same folks don't want it done here. But that's the official U.S. government standard, where we would sanction other countries for voting this way.
Right.
Even Mexico requires voter ID and does not allow mail-in ballots except under extreme circumstances, if you're sick or you're working abroad and you have to physically show up to apply. So our own, Jimmy Carter's own voting standards at the Carter Center, which is sort of the authoritative place supposedly for clean elections. Our elections don't even meet the Jimmy Carter Center's standards for clean elections.
And the Democrats are pushing a relaxation of even those standards. Yeah, I mean, you're right. I mean, we would always say you have to have a nonpartisan election commission. Democrats trying to pass a bill that would make it a partisan election commission. Well, how's that going to work? Not very well.
With centralized funding and therefore centralized control.
Right. Yeah. Oh, yeah. And taxpayer funding of elections. But no, it's. People need to understand that unfortunately, too many of their fellow citizens are willingly giving away their freedom for a very false sense of security, a very false sense. So, my recommendation is, get your own house in order, concentrate on your local government, your state government, trying as much as possible over time. This is taking decades to build up to create this beast, but over time, bring more of that governing authority back to local government. I mean, that's the vision of our founding fathers. Government close to the governed, where it's more accountable, it's more efficient, it's more effective. I mean, as we've seen with the COVID response, open your eyes. It's been a miserable failure. Quit listening to the people who have prescribed all these things that didn't work.
And come out and support your fellow citizens who are actually trying to do the right thing by exercising local control, whether it's a school board, whether it's supporting your local police, whether it's keeping law and order in your own town and keeping things clean. Because you can hold local officials accountable quite easily, as opposed to federal ones. Well, we've got about a minute left.
And heed what Justice Brandeis said in I think a 1930 opinion about the controversies over misinformation in the public. He said, where that is important, the solution is more speech, not less. So if you're concerned about misinformation, don't support censorship. Support the flourishing of free speech. It's the best anecdote. It's the best solution to misinformation, disinformation, but that's not the path we're on right now. People like me are being censored, we're being suppressed, we're being lied about, what we say is distorted, but being distorted by mainstream media that have the power. And by the way, on the whole COVID issue, whether we're talking about early treatment, the people who suppress this will never admit they are wrong. And unfortunately, they have the power to help ensure that they're never proven wrong. So that's what we're up against. Those of us who are trying to push early treatment, that are just asking the questions, that are using government's own information to ask questions we're not allowed to ask them, we're up against people that will never admit they're wrong, and they've got the power that's going to be difficult to prove them wrong. And people need to take that in consideration as well. But thank you for what you've done. Thank you for having the courage to be an eyewitness to what happened on January 6th and trying to promote the truth.
Well, thank you for giving voice to those who saw what they saw. And so, Senator Ron Johnson, thanks for joining us at the Center for Security Policy, and we'll be following very closely how your investigations move ahead.
I enjoyed it.